In this video, we'll discuss the energy critical infrastructure sector, threats, attacks, and mitigation strategies. This video was brought to you by the National Cybersecurity Training and Education Center out of Whatcom Community College. NCyTE Center in this material is based upon work supported by the National Science Foundation. My name is Philip Kreger. I am a professor of cybersecurity at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Daytona Beach, Florida. So the topics we'll cover include a review of the previous video, in particular what compromises the energy critical infrastructure sector. Then we'll talk about threats to the energy sector, attacks on the energy sector, mitigation strategies for improving cybersecurity across the energy critical infrastructure sector, and finally a wrap-up. So in the first video, we pointed out that the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency has designated 16 sectors as critical infrastructure sectors in the United States. One of these is the energy sector. This sector fuels the economy of the 21st century. Without a stable energy supply, health and welfare are threatened, and the U.S. economy cannot function. Presidential Policy Directive 21 identifies the energy sector as uniquely critical because it provides an enabling function across all critical infrastructure sectors. This energy sector ecosystem includes power plants, utilities, nuclear plants, and something called the electrical grid. The vulnerabilities of the energy sector are of particular concern to national security due to its enabling function across all critical infrastructure systems, with electricity and fuel used to power transportation, water facilities, hospitals, and communications. A successful attack on the nation's energy sector could snowball to affect many of these other systems. And therein lies the key to this enabling function. Without electricity and without fuel, we don't have transportation, we don't have water, we don't have hospitals, and we don't have communications. So what are the complicating factors in securing our energy infrastructure? Note that these factors pretty much apply to all critical infrastructure sectors. The first is complexity. The infographic on the screen indicates the complexity of the energy infrastructure sector and the security challenges. For example, energy is broken down into the generation of the electricity, the transmission, the distribution, the consumption, and the microgrids. However, as we'll see, the energy sector combines primarily a lot of older legacy technology along with newer technology that's replacing it, which then leads to the smart generation of electricity, the smart distribution, as well as the distribution generation. Another is the age of the infrastructure. Much of the equipment that comprises the electrical grid is antiquated and needs updating. The grid itself is critical infrastructure comprising a network of more than 7,650 power plants, which are integrated via 450,000 miles of high voltage transmission lines. Estimates are that the grid includes 70,000 transformer power substations and thousands of power generating units. The grid is mostly dependent on legacy technology. 70% of transmission lines are at least 25 years old and approaching the end of their life cycle. And 60% of the circuit breakers are more than 30 years old compared to useful lives of 20 years old. So why don't these companies just replace this technology? Replacing infrastructure is costly and sometimes unnecessary, adding to the fact that critical infrastructure is primarily composed of private businesses. About 80% of the critical infrastructures are owned by private businesses. And since businesses are in business to remain in business, if something is working, businesses are loath to replace that equipment. Or in other words, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Another complicating factor is technological innovation. And one of these technological innovations is a push by governments to move towards something called smart cities. Governments in many of these smart cities tap into a combination of Internet of Things, that is IoT, which we've discussed in previous videos, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, which we've also discussed in a series of videos, augmented reality, edge computing, blockchain, which we've also discussed in a previous video, and other cutting-edge solutions in order to slowly replace the aging technologies currently existing. And a smart city looks something like this, where you have the Internet of Things, you have smart health, intelligent shopping, smart buildings, smart homes, smart street lights. The only way to have a smart city is to increase the digitization and the networking within the city. And as we know, once we start doing that, all of these devices plugging into the internet create a threat vector for malicious actors. Now, this increased technological innovation could also increase the chances of a cyber hack. Weighing this danger against the need to improve service and convenience and update an aging infrastructure is a major concern of the energy sector. And this infographic shows you the move from the old mechanical and manual metering system that gauges the amount of electricity that you've used on your home all the way to an electronic meter. And finally, we have these things which we call smart meters, which have expanded capabilities for things like remote recording, dynamic electricity pricing, real-time information, remote controlling, quality monitoring, event feedback, and remote firmware upgrading. So now that we've looked at the complicating factors, let's look at some of the potential cyber threats to the energy infrastructure sector. In 2019, Siemens published the results of a study over 1,200 principals in the energy infrastructure sector, looking at the current state of cybersecurity in the sector as well as potential threats. The study was a survey of about 1,200 people, including technicians, managers, directors, supervisors, and senior executives. The study found that computerization has transformed the utility industry. The rapid adoption of connected power generation, transmission, distribution, and end-use assets are enabling utilities to move away from centralized power generation technologies and towards distributed energy, as I showed in the previous infographic. The target of cyber attacks has shifted from IT, that is information technology, towards something called operational technology. The majority of respondents agree that cyber threats are a greater risk in the OT than the IT environment. So you're probably wondering, what is OT? Now, if you've watched previous videos, in particular the video on advanced manufacturing, I went into great detail on the concept of operational technologies. And so I'll include a link in the description of this video so you could go watch that to get a more fuller understanding of operational technologies. But until then, let's look at a brief definition. Operational technologies are programmable systems or devices that interact with the physical environment or manage devices that interact with the physical environment. These systems and devices detect or cause a direct change through the monitoring and or control of devices, processes, and events. Now, operational technologies are actually much older than information technology, but as information technology has increased and been embedded in businesses and our lives, there's now a meshing of the operational technologies along with the information technologies. But as we'll see, they can't be dealt with exactly the same way when it comes to cybersecurity. Where past attacks primarily targeted data theft, current and future attacks can hijack control systems and logic controllers that operate critical infrastructure with the intent to cause physical damage and outages. Now, what do we mean by physical damage? How could an attack on a business cause physical damage? I'm not going to go too far into this, but it's really on the operational technology side where there is the potential for physical damage. And a good example of this came in the early 2000s when a malicious worm called Stuxnet was delivered to an Iranian nuclear plant on a thumb drive. And without going into too much detail, the malware was able to infect and spread across a SCADA network within the Natanz uranium enrichment facility. And as you see on the screen, there's these things called centrifuges, which actually spin at thousands and thousands of revolutions per minute in order to enrich the uranium. The malware was able to take control of these centrifuges and actually make them spin too fast or too slow, actually causing physical damage to these centrifuges, which are part of the operational technology of this enrichment facility. That's physical damage. Utilities are concerned by the unique characteristics of operational technology environments, including a focus on availability, reliability, and safety. These are the types of systems that need to be running on a continuous basis. But if we look at what we're trying to protect with the operational technologies, availability, reliability, and safety, as we've discussed before about information technology, we're actually looking at slightly different things to try to secure. For example, we've talked about confidentiality. We've talked about the integrity and the availability of the information. Once we start combining the information technology systems with the operational technology systems, creating a very complex mesh of interaction, you'll see that being able to protect both becomes exceedingly difficult. So what are some of the differences between IT and OT? Well, as you see on the infographic on the screen, information technology involves the servers, computers, and mobile devices that enable business operations in the utility industry, whereas the operational technology are the machines, systems, and networks used to generate, transmit, and distribute power. Most IT systems are considered obsolete in about 3 to 5 years, and it's very easy to replace that technology, whereas the operational technology is generally much older. They're considered legacy systems that are 10 to 20 years old. One of the threats to information technology is the loss of data, whereas for operational technology, there's an impact to production, health, safety, and environment. Those are two totally different sets of things to try to secure. And I'm not going to go into everything on the infographic. You can pause this and read it yourself. But if we go down to the bottom where it says straightforward upgrades and automated changes, and if you're in an IT or cybersecurity class and you own a computer, you know how easy it is normally to upgrade your system. Whereas when it comes to operational technology, some of these technologies are, as I've said before, 20 or 30 years old. So it's sometimes the vendors go out of business. So there's something called blind spots to operational technologies. We know much more about cybersecurity and protecting our information than we do with operational technologies, as I've said before, for a number of different reasons. So what are some of these blind spots? A big one is the lack of visibility into operating assets. That means that companies don't exactly know where all their operational technologies are and in what state they're currently in. And that's going to be one of the important keys to protect operational technologies, is just understanding where they are and what they're doing. Lack of response plan and a slow response to past incidents. The participants in this study indicated that while the plans for protecting information security are pretty well laid out, the same plans for operational technologies are often lacking and very slow to be implemented. Zero-day attacks, often associated with a global mega attacks or industrial safety event. What are zero-day attacks? Zero-day attacks are attacks that have never been seen before on the internet. Therefore, the makers of the anti-malware programs can include that malware signature because they've never been seen before. Incorrect belief that protections designed for IT are effective for OT. Again, because these things work differently. And they're also trying to protect different things. And so you can't have a one-size-fits-all plan that includes both information technology and the same plan for operational technologies. Another thing noted by participants in the study is there's a lack of investment in training and personnel. And this is something that has gone on forever and ever. And I'll show you why this is important, the fact that personnel need training on one of the next screens. Human capital gaps, including difficulty procuring and building industrial cybersecurity skills. And that's really the reason that you're in this program right now, is that you're learning your cybersecurity skills, because there's about a 1.2 million person gap between the number of cybersecurity jobs open and the number of people to fulfill those gaps. And finally, a lack of alignment between operation technology and IT security. And this really is something very similar to what we saw up here with this incorrect belief that protections designed for one can protect the other. But suffice to say, protecting information is not the same thing as protecting physical devices. Many organizations are reported using a compliance-centered approach to managing cybersecurity risks. Organizations comply with regulations or develop an internal checklist to hold themselves to specified standards and practices. This approach has improved overall cyber hygiene across the industry. Now, what do we mean by compliance-centered approaches? Well, achieving compliance with regulations is not synonymous with achieving strong security posture. Organizations that rely on a compliance approach alone may be responding to past incidents and may remain exposed to novel attacks. Now, I've used this term compliance and regulations here. What do we mean by that? Well, I've actually covered this in one of the supply chain videos, and I'll include a link in the video description. But I discuss in detail more of the compliance with certain cybersecurity regulations, but a couple that I talked about was the National Institute of Standards and Technology Special Publication 800-171, Protecting Controlled Unclassified Information in Non-Federal Systems and Organizations, and also the newer compliance measure, which is called the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, or CMMC, which is now on version 2. Now, getting back to what I discussed before of the importance of training and education personnel when it comes to cybersecurity, is that it is well known that insider threat presents the majority of attacks in operational technologies, but also information technologies as well. So what do I mean by insider threat? Well, according to NIST, the insider threat means the threat that an insider will use his or her authorized access wittingly or unwittingly to do harm to the security of organizational operations and assets, individuals, other organizations, and the nations. Now, look at what I have bolded up there. Wittingly or unwittingly. Normally, when we think of threats, we think of malicious actors who have an intent to harm an organization or a group. However, somebody who is working for the organization who doesn't have an intent, but who, because of, let's say, a lack of training, unwittingly does something to damage the information technology systems or operational technology systems, that would be considered an insider threat. And that's why education and training are extremely important when it comes to the protection of a company's assets. Now let's look at some cyber attacks. They realize that probably most of the cyber attacks that occur or threats are probably not going to be publicized, just like they're not going to be publicized in the financial services industry or any type of industry where the organization needs to make sure that the people feel comfortable with their security. And we've talked a little bit about this before, but this came out in 2019, Senate Cybersecurity hearing. The Russians are already in the grid, and by the grid, that means our electrical grid. So as late as 2019 that the U.S. government has been looking at these threats and been identifying these threats coming from nation states. Now let's flip back to the Wall Street Journal, which published in 2009, electricity grid in the U.S. penetrated by spies. Cyber spies have penetrated the U.S. electrical grid and left behind software programs that could be used to disrupt the system, according to current and former national security officials. Again, that was in the Wall Street Journal in 2009. The spies came from China, Russia, and other countries, these officials said, and were believed to be on a mission to navigate the U.S. electrical system and its controls. The intruders haven't sought to damage the power grid or other key infrastructure, but officials warn they could try during a crisis or war. And this is what really technical malicious actors do. These are called advanced persistent threats, is that they will be able to intrude into a system, and rather than making an attack immediately, is they wait to see if they can learn more about the system and to see how the systems are connected, how to identify key information for possible theft or for potential attacks. The Chinese have attempted to map our infrastructure, such as the electrical grid, said a senior intelligence official, and so have the Russians. So what has changed since 2009? Here we see this was published in January 10th, 2019, that America's electrical grid has a vulnerable backdoor and Russia walked right through it. Again, this is from the Wall Street Journal. It was reported that a reconstruction of the attack reveals a glaring vulnerability at the heart of the country's electrical system. Rather than strike the utilities head-on, the hackers went after the system's unprotected underbelly, hundreds of contractors and subcontractors who had no reason to be on high alert against foreign agents. And again, this is something that I discussed in the supply chain videos. You may have a company, and the company may have 100,000 workers, but there may be dozens or even hundreds of contractors and subcontractors that work on a piecemeal basis or on a long-term basis for the company. And when you're considering the cybersecurity of the infrastructure, you not only have to consider those working directly from the company, but also those that provide contracting and subcontracting services for that company as well, which makes it an extremely complex endeavor to cover all the potential threat vectors. So what are some of the mitigation strategies for these types of attacks? Well, there's a number of them, including when it comes to the operational technologies, is increasing the visibility of the operational technology systems. Visibility into the current status of your equipment and systems can help recognize attacks, mitigate damage, and recover quickly. Respondents cited a lack of visibility as a major pain point in OT security work. Using analytics, AI, and connectivity can improve security for the industrial space as lower-cost solutions come onto the market. A second is to develop skill sets in operational technologies. Again, we're getting back to that training and education. Attackers will become more skilled, and defenders need to keep up. Organizations need to plan for this reality, whether that means training in-house expertise, hiring new employees, or anticipating contract needs. Also, complexity and interconnectedness. Solutions need to account for the interconnected nature of your systems, that is, combining that information technology with operational technology. OT and IT security are not identical, but should be aligned to work together. Executives may need to prioritize which assets or information is most important to protect. Finally, within the last few years, NIST has come out with new practice guidelines for energy sector asset management. That's how important asset management is just identifying the assets that you have, identifying their importance, and then making sure they're secure and according with their importance. According to this guide, a challenge for energy organizations is maintaining an updated asset inventory. It is difficult to protect what is not seen or is not known. Without an effective asset management solution, organizations that are unaware of assets in their infrastructure may unnecessarily expose themselves to cybersecurity risks. This NIST Cybersecurity Practice Guide provides detailed steps on how energy organizations can identify and manage OT assets and detect cybersecurity risks associated with them. There's also legislation and policy which we alluded to in the last video. The electrical grid is the only critical infrastructure sector with mandatory and enforceable security standards. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has authority through the Energy Policy Act of 2005 to oversee the reliability and security of the bulk power grid. FERC has designated the North American Electric Reliability Corporation with the authority to set and enforce standards in this area, including cybersecurity. And as of 2019, these are the states that have either considered cybersecurity measures on a state basis or enacted cybersecurity measures. And you see that there is a large gap between the number that have not considered or have not implemented and those that have had. But more recently, the Biden administration has taken a bold action to protect electricity operation from increasing cyber threats. And Biden's initiative modernizes cybersecurity defenses through the following. It encourages owners and operators to implement measures or technology that enhance their detection, mitigation, and forensic capabilities. Includes concrete milestones over the next 100 days for owners and operators to identify and deploy technologies and systems that enable near real-time situational awareness and response capabilities in critical industrial control systems and operational technology networks. Reinforces and enhances the cybersecurity posture of critical infrastructure information technology networks. And finally, includes a voluntary industry effort to deploy technologies to increase visibility of threats in the industrial control system and operational technology systems. Now remember, again, to restate that 80% of the critical infrastructure is owned by private businesses. And that's why often the U.S. government can't mandate anything for the critical infrastructures. However, they can promote a voluntary effort to deploy some of the technologies and plans that have been created by the government. So we covered a review of the previous video. We talked about threats to the energy sector. We talked about some attacks on the energy sector. And we talked about some of the mitigation strategies. And we had this wrap up. This video was brought to you by the National Cybersecurity Training and Education Center out of Whatcom Community College.